All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order for the Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District. This morning, unfortunately, our chairman is unavailable. He is dealing with some personal issues, family issues, so he could not be with us this morning. So I am here in his place as the vice chair. So this morning, I would ask that, Mr. Mayberry, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
Join me in honor of our great nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayberry. Appreciate it. All right, Madam Clerk, can I get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Von Hartung is absent. Bob Lucy, Vice Chair.
Here.
Marcia Burkbigler.
Here.
Kitty Jones.
Present.
Jeannie Herman.
Here.
Fire Chief Charles Moore.
Here.
Deputy District Attorney Nate Edwards.
Here.
I'm Nancy Parent, County Clerk. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, Chief, item 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 3 is public comment. Madam Clerk, is there any public comment?
We have one person signed in, Mr. Cliff Lowe.
Good morning, Mr. Lowe.
Morning, Commissioner. Cliff Lowe, Washoe Valley. Reference is made to agenda items 9 and 10 that include a proposal to replace 2 fire stations in Washoe Valley with a single station. Washoe Valley is not your typical rural area. Among other things, it has 2 higher density areas. New Washoe City on the east side of the lake with, according to a county report, over 3,000 people as of 2010. And the area where I live on the west side of the lake at the southern end, where we have 107 home sites in a small area. At the same time, Washoe Valley has a designated scenic byway. Very sadly, 3 years ago next month, a chunk of that scenery was lost in the Little Valley Fire, lost due to negligence and mismanagement by government agencies. In that awful fire, 23 beautiful homes were destroyed and the lives of 23 families drastically changed. And all one has to do is drive through the valley and look to the west to see the huge burn scar that virtually all of us now have to live with. Would you actually add insult to injury by degrading fire and emergency medical services? As you have often been told in no, minutes count. The idea of replacing 2 Washoe Valley stations with one at the north end of the valley was offered for similar reasons a number of years ago during, I think, the Great Recession or shortly after it. It was rejected at that time. Now we are in better times financially, and it should be rejected again. Clearly, there are challenges in the northern part of the district, but I believe you should direct Chief Moore and his staff to find another way. It is simply wrong to rob Peter to pay Paul. Most of you are familiar with this story about an airport. This story has some similarities here. A family knowingly moves into a home near an existing airport, and then they complain about the noise. Understandably, there's little sympathy or relief. But a family that has lived in that area for years and then a new airport is built close by, well, they're pretty justified in their complaints, and I think most would agree they're entitled to relief. They have for years had a reasonable expectation that their lives would not be significantly changed for the worse. In Washoe Valley, we have families that have built or moved into homes decades ago. At the time they took up residence, they could count on much shorter response times than are being proposed here. Don't we longtime Washoe Valley residents have a reasonable expectation that our safety will not be significantly changed for the worse? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe.
And for the record, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lowe had sent an email earlier to the board, and I was provided with a copy, and I will put it on record for today's meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, seeing no further public comment, we will close public comment, bring it back to the board. We are on to item number 4, Commissioner and Fire Chief's announcement. Mr. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to announce that I met recently with BLM regarding target shooting and along with other regional fire partners, and we're coming up with some strategies to try to solve the problem. I'll be able to report on that hopefully next month or November. think there's a number of things that we'll be able to do to try to improve the incidence of fires caused by target shooting.
Great. Any other commissioners' announcements? All right. Seeing none, we will move on. Chief, we're on to item 5, our consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 5 is consent agenda items. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Any questions from the board in regards to the consent agenda? Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on any items for the consent agenda?
No, sir.
All right. I have a motion from Commissioner Berkbiegler. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner Herman. All right. Looking for them. We'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, Chief, we are on to item 6.
Item 6 is promotional and new employee badge pinning, and I'd like to step down to the podium and announce our promotions and new employees.
I guess they don't want their badges this morning.
Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to announce new promotions, and I'll go through these one at a time. We have promotions and one new employee. Promoting from captain to battalion chief is Mr. James Solero. Promoting from fire equipment operator to captain is Mr. Brett Porter. From fire paramedic to fire engineer is Mr. Ryan Collins, second from the end, and fire engineer promoted from fire paramedic to fire engineer is Nikki Stout. And then I also want to acknowledge our new hire, Zeb Nomura, who is our EMS coordinator. 70% of what we do is emergency medical responses, so Zeb is going to help Chief Cameron build our EMS program even stronger. So with that, we'd like to give them their new badges and congratulate them here in public.
Welcome. Congratulations, everybody.
So pending James's Battalion Chief James Solero's badge is his wife Katrina. Brett Porter's wife Sarah is pinning him. Ryan Collins, his wife Danielle, will be pinning him. For Nikki Stowe, her husband Austin, who is also a TM firefighter, will be pinning her. And Zeb Nomura's wife Heather will be pinning his badge. Let me hand them all out.
That's awesome. Awesome. Another big round of applause for all the work.
Mr. Chairman, may we do a photo?
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Bring your family.
Congratulations, everybody.
Just get a little tighter. We just bring it in a little tighter, yeah. Just squeeze, get real close.
Those two picked it out? You guys are so slick for us kids. Are you gonna work with me? Or are you gonna go with Chief?
Brittany Lemon's going to read it, unless one of Commissioner.
I know. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. We are now on to item 7. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 7 is to proclaim October 2019 as Fire Prevention Month, and reading the proclamation will be our fire prevention specialist, Brittany Lemon.
Welcome, Ms. Lemon.
Good morning, Commissioners. It's my honor to read the proclamation for Fire Prevention Month. Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District Board of Fire Commissioners Proclamation. Whereas Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District Board of Fire Commissioners are committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting our county, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern, both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at greatest risk from fire, and whereas the majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occur at home each year. And whereas residents who have planned and practiced a home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire. And whereas residents should get out and stay out, never going back inside the home for people, pets, or things. And whereas residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take action to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes and community. And whereas the 2019 Fire Prevention Week theme, "Not every hero wears a cape, plan and practice your escape," effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire, not only in our homes, but in our community. Therefore, the Board of Fire Commissioners does hereby proclaim October 2019 as Fire Prevention Month and urges all the people of Washoe County to be aware of their surroundings, look for available ways out in the event of a fire or other emergency, respond when the smoke alarm sounds by exiting the building immediately, and to support public safety activities and efforts of Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District's Fire and Emergency Services during the Fire Prevention Month, dated this 17th day of September 2019. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. This is an action item, and so, Madam Clerk, is there any public comment?
I have no one signed in, Mr. Chair.
Chair.
I have a motion from Commissioner Jung. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner Burkbigler. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Can I have
Motion.
you enter your votes in the system? I entered myself.
There you go. I think we got all our votes in there. Motion passes unanimously. Please affirm your votes. Thank you. All right, Chief, we are on to Fire Chief's report. Item 8.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, item 8 is the Fire Chief's report, informational briefing on operational matters and activities for the month of August and September 2019. I want to give you a brief update on Hidden Valley Fire Station redevelopment. Reno staff will be going before their city council on October to get final approval on a boundary line adjustment. We need just a little bit more square footage to be able to do parking and landscaping. And once that is complete, then we get on with the special use permit application to the county. And when that's complete, then we can start with construction probably in April or May of next year. The construction documents for the residents that we purchased to be the crew quarters are now complete. I'm just reluctant to start work on that until we get the boundary line adjustment done. And once that's finished, then there's no reason why we would delay on improvements in the house. So I would guess that probably by fall of 2020, best case is that we'll have the new station complete and ready to move in. Although the living quarters will be done much sooner than the truck bay will. The only piece we haven't figured out is how we'll house the apparatus during the construction, and we'll probably use an inflatable structure to house the engine for the short time that the truck bay is under construction.
Chief, Commissioner Burke-Brewer.
How many firefighters are going to be stationed at that station? Three.
Three,
And so 3 24/7?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
No change to the complement of staffing. Although the truck bay, as it is now, as I've mentioned to the board, is so small, we only have one fire engine that will fit in it. So the bay will be substantially larger so that any piece that we have will be able to fit in it, plus additional pieces of equipment. Just a brief update on the Long Valley fire. I want to thank staff for working very, very hard on that. It was one fire that we had this summer that was really touch and go, affecting a lot of homes. Jasper fire was bad enough, but Long Valley actually got into the homes. Thankfully, our crews kept that fire to west of Red Rock Road. Had it jumped that road, we would have had a much different fire, and we certainly would have had more structures lost. So I believe that fire was all on BLM land, maybe just a tiny bit on TM. But nevertheless, very rocky terrain, and aircraft was very, very useful in combating that fire. But nevertheless, all of our regional partners, the City of Reno, City of Sparks, Carson City, East Fork Story, I could go on and name them all, BLM, Forest Service. We had quite a bit of equipment there from lots of different agencies. Lake Tahoe regional chiefs, so all the way from the California end of Lake Tahoe. So we threw as much as we possibly could at that fire. Unfortunately, we did lose one home, but nevertheless, I'd say that we saved probably 150 easy. So it stresses, again, the importance of defensible space. We saved a lot of homes because they had the proper defensible space in place. But nevertheless, want to mention that my staff and the staffs of all of our regional partners did a fantastic job on that fire. Item 8.3 is the Commissioner Dashboard update. If there's any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any commissioners have any questions? No? Seeing none? All right. Is that it, Chief, all you have in regards to in response to all that? We're good?
It is, and then 8B, if there's any questions about response statistics, I'd be glad to answer those.
Okay. All right. Seeing none, we'll close item 8 and we will move on to item 9. Chief.
Item 9 is discussion and possible direction to staff regarding a deployment plan that includes new locations of existing and future district fire stations and firefighting personnel, including review of response statistics, incident locations, and response time performance, possible consolidation of stations 30 Bowers and station 32 Eastlake, options for redeployment of firefighting personnel, mutual and automatic aid improvements with Carson City, and a discussion regarding possible future relocation of personnel from Station 44 Stead to possible new career stations located at the Volunteer Station 430 Silver Lake and Volunteer Station 440 in Lemon Valley. So before I introduce the team who helped the district with this study, I just want to say that it's my job as fire chief to make sure that we protect as many possible areas of the district as we possibly can in a manner that's uniform and consistent with the standards of cover that the Board of County Commissioners adopted in 2011. And that plan gives us a yardstick by which we measure the efficiency of deploying fire stations. So that is the standard that we used in this. Through the study, we found that we are underutilized in some areas of the district, and we are underserving areas in the north. The board has correctly observed through many monthly reports that we're responding to 75% of our call load is in the north and only 25% roughly is in the south, yet we have a lot more resources in the south than we do in the north. We have many, many more fires in the north. We have many, many more calls of a serious nature in the north. So what I understood the board's direction was to look at how we would rebalance our resources, and we've done a very exhaustive study on this with quite a bit of data, and we'll now present our findings to you. So let me introduce to you Heather Kerwin, who was our statistician in our quantitative data analysis. Mr. Jay Johnson, who is going to be glad when this is over, because if I ask him for one more map, I think he's going to go crazy. And Alex Kukulis, our deputy chief, who will speak to the operational ramifications of what we're recommending. So Heather, take it away.
Before you get started, if I could note for the record, we got a revised report this morning, which I distributed to the board, and we'll put on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good morning, Heather.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing well.
Good,
Thank
good.
you. Heather Kerwin, statistician. Going to go ahead and walk you through the first few slides before handing it over to Alex. Just to cover the types of analysis that were conducted. We're very exhaustive. You saw a preliminary list of this at a previous meeting. Over 350 data tables were produced. We were looking for some gaps and holes and things that seemed out of what we would expect, and there wasn't anything that really stood out as alarming. There were a few interesting patterns which we took a further deep dive into. Do I have the clicker? There we go. That works. So this is a line list of what we ran through. Call volume, average number per day, calls for service by type, and by REMSA priority, which are some of those preliminary analyses that you saw earlier. Call volume by time of day of week, nothing standing out of the ordinary there. The proportion of each station's jurisdiction land areas overlaid with REMSA response zones, looking at those same land areas relative to the call volume that occurs, and then looking at those standards of cover measurements, performance, and looking at those different segments of time that go into a full response time from a citizen's perspective, from the time that call gets into the PSAP to the arrival of a first responder. Much of the analysis listed here were also pulled out and put, with a great deal of help from GIS, Jay Johnson, put into maps and then lifted back out and reanalyzed as well. This is just a really broad overview. We utilized the data set from CAD data from January 2015, went through October 31st of 2018. These average calls per day were normalized for the number of calls within each time period, so adjustments were made to 2018 as 304 days there. As you can see, there's been a leveling out and a slight decline. This pattern that we see from 2017 to 2018 and that slight decline holds true. It's consistent for the rest of Washoe County first responding agencies as well. And anytime we utilized a single year of calls to look at what happens in a continual year, we used 2017 because it has the higher call volume of all the years that were analyzed there. So we would be filling that information, that data was utilizing the most data points possible. And this is a chart showing across all of the data aggregate from January 2015 through the October 2018. The average number of calls per day that each station receives in ascending order there. So you'll see among the bottom three, those first three stations there, 30, 39, and 32, at about one or less than one call a day, you see that stations 30 and 39 are averaging about 8 calls every other day, if that's an easier way to understand those fractions there. And then moving down the list, seeing those top 4 stations receiving the highest volume of calls average per day and overall volume in the time period are all in the north. And as you can see, when we split North versus South Battalion, the North Battalion is receiving approximately 3 times as many calls in any given day.
Good morning. For the record, Alex Kukulis, Deputy Chief of Truckee Meadows Fire. continue on here, I'm also going to give a little shout out to Jay Johnson, GIS. I'm going to use some of his maps and correlate all this data together and kind of put it in an operational perspective for you guys. And the purpose of the study, before I get into this, as has been mentioned a few times, was for me, just kind of to boil it down to the simple things, is to identify areas within our standard of cover where we're deficient in our standards, those areas where we're compliant and relatively meeting it, and then those areas where we have some excess and outperform our SOC standards. And that's kind of what we're going to present here. Just to give you a review of the adopted standard of cover, it kind of falls into three categories. It's based on population density and response time standards. So when we talk about population density, it's for an urban area greater than 2,000 people per square mile, and we have very few areas within Truckee Meadows Fire that fall in the urban definition, other than predominantly in Sun Valley and a couple little pockets elsewhere. Within that area, the adopted standards that the board has assumed was less than 8 minutes 85% of the time. Within the suburban area, which covers most of where our populated areas are within the district, it's defined as an area of between 1,000 and 2,000 people per square mile, and the adopted response time standard there is less than 10 minutes 85% of the time. And in the rural areas, which are kind of the outlying areas, that's less than 1,000 people per square mile with a less than 20-minute response time standard 85% of the time. So I know this map is busy and hard to see, and we put them side by side for a purpose, and I think they're in the your handouts as well. But on the left is our current configuration of stations. The green, this is also, as mentioned, the 4 years data set all put on there. So the green are the areas where we actually had incidents and where we met our SOC compliance. Red are those areas that fall outside of compliance. It should be noted that I'll use a suburban as an example. It has a 10-minute response time. If an incident had a response time of 9 minutes and 59 seconds, it's going to look green. If it's 10 minutes and 1 second, it's red. So even though those 2 seconds are materially insignificant as far as the outcome of an incident, it will show that way on here. So you could discern from this that if a red area is adjacent to a green area, it's relatively a similar response time. Nonetheless, there's a few areas that kind of stood out under our current deployment plan. They're highlighted in those yellow circles there. So we've got, starting in the north, on the northwest side there in District 44, left of the Stead Airport, that's Silver Knolls, and then on the other side, Lemon Valley. We've got quite a significant number of incidents in those areas, and of course pushing out in the rural areas, and that's probably going to always be that way as we get into the very remote areas of the district. Then out the I-80 corridor to the east, those look red because they don't fall within our response time standard coverage, but it should be noted that we have automatic aid with Story County and a little bit with Sparks there as well that does change those response times. So this is just noting our coverage of that area. And then on the south end there in the Virginia foothills, of note there is we are having communications with Reno Fire on better utilizing Station 12 there. We also have engine 33 and 36 from Foothill and Arrow Creek run into that area about simultaneous response time. So although one engine gets there slightly outside the response time, we can put 2 engines in there relatively quickly. So just to kind of cover those areas. The map on the right is showing if we were to redeploy a unit from the south to the North Battalion, one of the hypothesized scenarios was that we would staff the 2 volunteer stations and make those career stations in Silver Knolls and Lemon Valley. And you can see just the shift in the coverage there from red to green. So that's kind of what we're going to focus in on is those pockets of the north and the south and how what we're proposing addresses those. So here's drilling in on the north. So on the left is again our current configuration. All those calls fall outside of our adopted standard of coverage. It's predominantly suburban areas, a little bit of rural. And the count there on this is just the 2017 data set, as 490 calls fell outside of our adopted standard of coverage in District 44 there from our current location. Again, if we were to shift a resource and staff those 2 stations as proposed, That falls to 0 calls fall outside of the standard coverage in Silver Knolls and Lemon Valley, with only 23 calls in that pocket there towards Golden Valley and the southern areas of Lemon Valley. So this same map I presented just a second ago, just what we did is then look at the district as a whole. So including all stations under a current scenario on the left, we meet our standard coverage compliance 87.7% of the time. And this is sort of theorized with drive times. There are actual scenarios with simultaneous calls, snow, weather that can adjust that, but this is based on projected station locations. And using the same theory, by moving those stations to the north, we have SOC compliance at 92.7%. So a 5% enhancement in coverage by shifting that resource from the south to north. So shifting to the south, as has been mentioned, we really don't have the current staff or budget capacity to add that additional company in the north at this time. There's no planned growth at this time, so we're just looking at what can we do with rearranging the pieces that we currently have. As mentioned earlier, we focused in on areas where we have abundance or are exceeding our standard of cover compliance, and the only area that popped out during this exhaustive analysis was the Washoe Valley area. So we looked at what has been talked about, and it's been mentioned that this has been looked at for many years. We even looked back at the 2010 Diamante study, and it discussed this briefly. It didn't make a recommendation to do this at that time, but it did note that the addition of the freeway and there was 2 separate jurisdictions at that time, and they weren't able to pull all the data together. We now have the freeway open, and we have one organization operating that whole valley. So we do have the data, which is being presented at this time. So looking at a centralized location between the 2 current stations, we tried to analyze what that looks like. And so it's not included on this map, but Heather's presentation there suggested it's for both District 30 and 32, so both sides of the valley. In 2017, there were 680 incidents. So that includes East Washoe Valley, West Washoe Valley, as well as Pleasant Valley. So still a relatively small number of calls for that whole area. We then overlaid it with the standard of cover, and what we have here is from the projected station location in the center area, most of those 680 calls, with the exception of 70, still fall within the adopted standard of coverage. So 70 out of 680 would fall out, and that's predominantly, as you can see there, on the south end of the East Washoe. We've actually had the engine go out and do some drive time analysis, and it's confirmed by the GIS estimates too. So anything south of the 2 stations that are currently staffed is going to see about a 3-minute increase in response time. One of the things we've done on the West Washoe side, down the southeast Lake, Duck Hill area, as of September 1st, we've rolled out a new improved automatic aid agreement with Carson Fire. They're now sending us an engine into all of Washoe Valley, actually all the way up into Pleasant Valley. It will be our 4th, if not 5th engine on our run strings. They do still have the agreement with REMSA to send the ambulance up as far as Bellevue. So, and we also have our ambulance in that area, and we just took delivery of our new ambulance. It'll be in service within a few weeks that will be operating out of the valley as well. So there's going to be some added services there. So operationally, under this proposal, we currently run 3 personnel out of the 2 stations that are in Washoe Valley. Our suggestion, if we proceed with this, is to have a minimum of 4 people running out of this single station. So we would build it and construct it with the intent to be able to put 5 in there, should we ever be able to staff, say, the 2-person ambulance with a 3-person engine. But it just gives us some flexibility. But at a minimum, our intent would be to put 4 instead of 3 there. So some of what that means is that we'll have obviously added efficiency on EMS incidents. So having that extra personnel there enhances their performance there. Should that REMSA ambulance require a rider, which often happens on our critical calls, we send our medic with REMSA personnel into the hospital. As it currently stands, when that happens, that drops our engine staffing to 2, and it's effectively out of service. With a 4-person company running that area, that medic could go with the ambulance and still have the engine remain in service in the valley. Of course, the vast majority of incidents down in Washoe Valley are vehicle accidents related to the highway through there and the wind events that we get. So the ability of them to arrive there with a 4-person company for extrication accidents and those things will also improve the functionality of that crew. When it comes to fires, having 4 personnel in those situations where there's not a known rescue, they'll have 2 in, 2 out abilities to be able to make an interior fire attack without the arrival of an additional engine company. And I think that's it on that one. I should also note that when it comes to the wildland response side, seasonally, of course, NDF does staff crew out of the East Lake Station there, so there are additional resources there, and then the Forest Service runs out of the Galena Forest area. I did just kind of jot down some quick numbers. It's within your appendix, but in the report. So Station 30's call volume, of the top incidents listed, it was 9 out of the 14 locations that we typically respond to are all on the highway. So that's approximately 248 calls out of this data set that were on the highway. From where this new station location could be, it's about 1.5 minutes to the on-ramp of the freeway, and it's about 1.5 minutes from Station 30 now to get on at the Bowers Mansion on-ramp, off-ramp as well. So there's really no change in the access, ingress, egress to the freeway. So we expect that those calls on the highway will see relatively the same response. That's all I have on the presentation. Do you want to wrap it up?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just summarize. So the response then into Washoe would be engine 39 from Galena, which it comes down the back way of St. James, gets to old 395, I believe, in about 5 minutes. We have the new consolidated station. We have 33, which comes right down old 395, and we have Carson City. So we have 4 engines responding to Washoe Valley that get there, I think, relatively quickly. And but I would emphasize also that Station 32 Eastlake and 30 Bowers are dilapidated. So we're going to have to do something with those stations. Eastlake is now 40 years old. I believe it's just modular buildings in a metal garage bay. It's time to replace it. Bowers is in worse condition, and I'm sorry to say that we continually and perennially fight rodents and bats at that station. It was built in excess of 50 years. It's on a site that we do not own. It's leased from the state of Nevada. So if we were to rebuild it, the question is, do we rebuild it on land that we don't own? Do we approach the state of Nevada to sell us that land? Now, that's complicated, or we find a new lot to build that station on. But nevertheless, we're looking at building 2 new stations as opposed to 1, which it's opinion of staff, and I believe that the data supports that we can adequately serve Washoe Valley, particularly with the new enhanced automatic aid with Carson City. We're going to put in place a CAD-to-CAD link with Carson City that will not only benefit law enforcement, but also fire, and will speed the dispatch of Carson City to us. And it's a quid pro quo for Carson City because we'll be able to help them as well. It's the way automatic aid and mutual aid should work. But I'm mostly concerned for the North Valleys. It's not only just simply call volume, it's the number of fires, and it's severe fires. So if the board were to authorize staff to move forward on this, once the new consolidated station would happen, as we would be able to again, staff the new consolidated station with 4, and then take 2 additional personnel and move them to Sun Valley, where we would be responding with 5. We would be responding an engine and a 2-person squad. That squad would also be able to support Spanish Springs, Lemon Valley initially, and every fire station in the north. So until we get to the point where we have financial capacity to add 3 more personnel, then we would look at staffing perhaps Lemon Valley and moving that fire station to Silver Lake. So it's kind of a phased approach. None of this can really happen unless we consolidate these stations first. And when we do, we start gradually adding more resources to the north. So that consolidated station will allow us to free up personnel that moves to the north just as soon as we occupy that new station. It's noteworthy to say that we have about 10% of the total call volume in the south and the north that are fires, but because we're 3-to-1 in the north, the sheer volume of fires that we have in the north is concerning to me. And particularly when we go to Lemon Valley or Silver Lake, we're looking at response times that are around 12 to 16 minutes and even longer. As your fire chief, I have to tell you that we've got to fix that. And the plan to do this is going to take some time to roll out. And it's certainly strategic, but nevertheless, I believe it's important. I don't want to degrade anything in Washoe Valley, and I do not believe, honestly, that we are degrading it significantly because of the relationship that we'll have with Carson City and other improvements that we're making. So nevertheless, that is really the conclusion of this study. In the appendix, you can see in each one of your stations that lie within your wards what activity that station has. So again, I would just simply end with this, that we're trying to take the resources where we're underutilized and put them to areas where we're underserving. So it's shifting 6 stations from the south to 1 additional station in the north, and eventually, as time goes on, more stations in the north.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chief. Commissioners, are there any questions from the chief or staff in regards to the deployment plan? See, no? Okay. What we'll do, let's do this first. We have quite a bit of public comment signed in this morning, so what we'll do is we'll take public comment first, and then we'll come back to the board for kind of a further discussion. So, Madam Clerk, I'll just call public, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right. First, I have Mr. Cliff Lowe signed in, and then followed by Mr. Lowe will be Mr. Tom Hall.
I guess getting here early, you get to go first. Cliff Lowe, Washoe Valley. As I expected, the point has been raised that staffing at the proposed consolidated station will be 4 firefighters versus the usual 3. Well, I would certainly prefer 4-person crews at every station, and I'm confident, actually from previous conversations, that the chief and you would like 4-person staffing at every station. The 2-in, 2-out scenario applies to only a small fraction of calls, as you have heard many times, and that has been the justification for 3-person crews that almost every station has. Also, I'm not sure about the math here. You've got 2 3-person stations, so it's 6 people, you end up with a 4-person station, you free up 2 people, that's not enough for a 3-person crew, but it does provide additional resources. Now, the idea of automatic and mutual aid agreements with Carson City, that's an excellent idea, and it should be implemented or continued as long as it makes sense for both communities. But setting aside the fact that such agreements are not cast in stone and can be terminated, Reno, please don't tell me that these aid agreements solve the response time problem in Washoe Valley. Now, if you read only the executive summary of the 50-something page deployment plan, you might think that these agreements do solve that. But I'm pretty sure earlier on I saw a document for today's agenda that these aid plans with Carson City are only for structure and wildland fires. And as you well know, and as the deployment plan documents, such fires comprise only a small percentage of calls for service. According to the nearly 4-year period covered by the plan, 56% of the calls for Station 30 were for emergency medical services, and only 2% of the calls were for natural vegetation fires and 0% for structure fires. For Station 32 for the same period, 72% of calls were for EMS, with only 1% each for natural vegetation and structure fires. As I stated earlier, we, that is my wife and I, and my neighbors, live at the southern end of Washoe Valley. The distance to our home from current Station 30 is 3.8 miles. The distance to Carson City Station 52 is 6.7 miles, nearly double. Minutes count. Now, having 4 engines, 4 pieces of equipment respond is great and necessary and appropriate. I'm not a fire professional. I wouldn't begin to question that for structure, wildland, and other types of fires. But for the vast majority of calls, which are EMS, The first one to arrive is the important thing, and I don't know if those other engines showing up is going to make any difference. In your motion on this agenda item, I would ask you to clarify for the public record that accepting the presentation is not accepting the report's recommendations or agreeing with those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Next, I have Mr. Tom Hall, followed by Mr. William Naylor.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, acting as Chairman, Ms. Young, Broekbeker, Ms. Herman, and Chief. Chief came to my house actually about 4 years ago to promote the Little Valley control burn with Gene Phillips and the fire staff. I own property at 4,000 Old Ranch Road, 6,000 Old Ranch Road. My house burned down and 43 acres of my land burned, so I'm very sensitive to the fire issues. We built a new house in Reno at 4725 Woodchuck Circle, and we had a fire there during construction, burned 61 acres. So fires definitely on my mind. My comments are going to be brief because I wasn't alerted to this agenda item until basically yesterday. My one concern is how is this noticed? We have a number of people in West Washoe and East Washoe that may not have got notice that this consideration was under review today. So one is I would ask that the next time this comes around that a better notice be given. Some of the problems I have is that we still have potential for growth in Washoe Valley. They built the new bridge. They have increased the freeway in, and we expected more of our precious land to be developed. So I think there's a potential for more population growth in the south. The north, what I haven't seen is a comparison of building the new fire stations that Chief Moore talked about in the north. Normally you would say the pro and the con, or the A and the B approach. I haven't seen the cost analysis and haven't heard about it. What would it take to build new stations in the north to serve that need that's increasing? Renovating the stations 30 and 32, even though they're failing, as I understand they could be, what is the cost to renovate? Chief Moore talked about the fact that it sits on, the Bauer Station sits on the state of Nevada land. All that area, as I understand, is owned by the state or the Forest Service or BLM, and there certainly could be an enlargement of the site at Bowers to gain 4 or 5 acres if that's a possibility. I haven't seen the analysis of what it would take to enlarge that site. In Carson, we don't know where the next closest station is in Carson City. Is that near the hospital? Is it south? Where is that mutual aid coming from? And will the mutual aid be a matter of contract that's renewed and possibly terminated in the future? I have some comments on the proposed site, 6 acres. I'll reserve those until that matter is called up, with your permission.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Next, I have Mr. William Naylor, followed by Ms. Karen Kreider. Welcome.
Thank you. For the record, William Naylor, 40-year resident of Washoe Valley. I'm just going to make a few comments. The report we had, I know, was very complete. They did a lot of work, but it kind of implies that all the areas are similar, and they're not. Washoe Valley is a pretty unique area. Number one, as you are aware, there is a geological division between the east and the west sides of the valley. You cannot get across the valley like you can drive across town. You got to go all the way around to get there. Okay. Number two, only 2 small areas have water systems. In Washoe Valley, when you go to fight a fire, you have to take a tanker with you. Right now, with 2 stations, we have a couple of tankers. My understanding, in a really severe fire issue, you should have 3 rotating to keep those engines pumping water. If we're down to a tanker and that thing runs out of water, what do we do? Go to lunch while the building burns until it comes back? Number 3, we don't have RUMSA station in Washoe Valley. We count on the firefighters. They are our only paramedic first response. REMSA, in cases where they both respond, in your report shows 7 to 8 minute later response. That's death for somebody. That isn't satisfactory. Number 4, we have a Washoe Lake State Park down there. I don't know if you're aware, Washoe Lake State Park is the 3rd most visited park in the state of Nevada. It has 330,000 visitors a year. Are those numbers in your population statistics? We also have Davis Creek and Bowers Mansion down there, which gets significant visitors. These are very valuable and expensive county resources. They absolutely deserve a higher level of protection. Future growth in the area. We have Sierra Reflections already approved. That's like 1,000 units. We're talking thousands of people that have already been approved coming into Washoe Valley, but we want to yank resources out of Washoe Valley. I don't think we're looking far enough into the future. You need help in the north, get help in the north, but don't leave us shorthanded. Dangerous roadways. 395A, kind of interesting. We built the freeway, it goes down through there. I talked to NDOT, and I said, now you're going to raise the speed limit up to 55 miles an hour, right? Because it won't be the longest speed trap in Nevada anymore. They said, no, the road is far too dangerous to raise the speed limit. We're keeping it at 50 miles an hour. Wild horses, accident history, so on. That's a very dangerous roadway. I don't know if you've driven the bottom part of East Lake. It's lined with crosses and flowers. Not a good area. We need the response down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Naylor. Next, I have Ms. Karen Kreider, followed by Ms. Joyce Newman.
My name is Karen Kreider. I've lived in Washoe Valley for 33 years. I want you to imagine, if you will, that you are a resident of Washoe Valley. You live in the west side, or you live in Franktown, or you live in New Washoe City. Imagine now, please, if you would, that your mother is visiting and she has a heart attack. You call 911. Your house is on fire. You call 911. Your child is thrown from a horse, suffers a head injury, isn't breathing. You call 911. You assume that someone's going to arrive there soon, but having closed 2 stations, you now have a 3 to 8 minute longer wait. I want you to imagine, if you will, please, what that wait feels like, if you would. That was less than 2 minutes. With the removal of these 2 stations, you're asking us to add 3 to 8 to 15 minutes to a response. If it was your mother, your child, your home, I don't think that would be satisfactory. Please don't take our resources away.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Joyce Newman, followed by Ms. Cheryl Bailey.
that was moving. My name's Joyce Newman. My husband and I live on the south end of Washoe Valley, just north of the area served by the Carson City Mutual Aid Agreement. We moved there because of the proximity to Bowers Mansion and the fire station. We both have potentially life-threatening physical problems. He has heart disease and I have cancer. You know, I'm a numbers person and I understand some of those numbers that were presented today, but as Tom Hall pointed out, I didn't see any numbers that would compare the cost of building a new station to the cost of rehabilitating the existing stations. As I understand the agenda today, you're being asked to approve the purchase of property for the construction of a new station without any feasibility study. And, you know, I'm fiscally conservative and that just rubs me the wrong way. You know, I can think of perhaps the money that's being used to purchase that land could be used to provide better service to the northern end of the service territory. I submitted written comments and I'd like to ask to be able to submit more after having heard the comments here today, but like a previous speaker, we only learned about this hearing yesterday, and I would also suggest that perhaps for something of this magnitude, we should have been given better public notice. And I don't want it to diminish what the fire service does for us out there. We are so grateful to all the firefighters. We just can't begin to express how grateful we are for what they do for us out there, but we just think that perhaps this proposal is a bit misguided and premature. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cheryl Bailey, followed by Ms. Debbie Sheldra.
And Mr. Chairman, for the record, I received a copy of an email from Ms. Bailey, which I will put on record for today's meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
My name is Cheryl Bailey, and I've resided at 4105 Old 395 North Washoe Valley for 45 years. I respectfully request that my comments be added to the record. My home is next door to Bowers Mansion, or Bowers Station. We built our home where we felt that we would have fire protection. Bowers Station is tremendously important to the residents of Washoe Valley. Through the years, we have had fundraisers for the volunteers there to support the station. Imagine our dismay to find out last week that you want to close our station down and locate a new station so far away that a paramedic will not be able to get to us in a timely manner for a medical emergency. We have been able to keep our insurance premium at a reasonable rate because of the close proximity to a fire station. We're very concerned about how this will affect us financially since we are now retired. Our station may not be state-of-the-art, but it will cost the taxpayers of Washoe County a lot of money to buy the land and build a new station instead of doing the necessary upgrades to our existing 5-bay station. How much money will the taxpayers actually have to pay for having less service? Why were we not noticed about this before last week? My husband and I feel that this is not prudent use of taxpayers' money.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Next, I have Mrs. Debbie Sheltra, followed by Mr. Wendell Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. I'm also a 40-plus member resident of the Valley, also a burned-out resident of the Valley, and continue to be a resident of the Valley. We moved to the Valley because we had NDF, we had Bowers, and then the county came along and said, we can do a better job for you, so we're taking over and forming this district. And we went along with it, and now you're telling us you want to take that away. We had been involved with the Diamante study. There was a lot of publicity about that. There were public hearings. It was in front of the Citizen Advisory Board. This hasn't been in front of any of us. We found out about it because it was printed on the agenda. By the state law, you have to do it so many hours, so many days in advance. That was the first we knew about this study, this new plan. All of this has gone into the study, and the residents were never involved, or we would have come forth sooner with maybe some other suggestions. I want to tell you that I spoke with Fire Chief Slayman in Carson City on Friday. I spoke with Mayor Bill Kroll on Friday of Carson City, and they both told me that whatever the agreement is called, mutual aid or auto, whatever you want to call it, is only for structure and wildland fires. It is not for paramedics. The paramedic truck from Carson is not going to run to Bellevue or to Pleasant Valley or anywhere else. They do try to cover the very south tip, Duck Hill, and that's all they cover with their paramedics. So no, you are lessening our ability to have coverage, and a lot of us are retired in the valley. I had an incident, and the fire department argued with me at the legislature in 2017 that their response to my house was only 13, while I had it on my watch and my phone at over 20 minutes. But regardless of 13 or 20, my partner, who had a stroke, would have been dead if it had been a heart attack. So we already have limited resources. We've made that a little bit better to the south, but Carson City is not willing to give us their paramedic out of their College Park station all the way into Washoe Valley. And if you think that, just call the chief or call the mayor. It's not true. We would ask you to please go back, leave our 2 stations. We all have bats. We all have rodents in Washoe Valley. That's indigenous to the valley. When the bays are open, the bats come in. It's not an impossible situation to fix and to mitigate, and we all do it in our homes all the time. We all have rodent control in our homes. Please don't spend this money and lessen our services. Please increase the services to the north in some other way other than robbing us of our very limited resources. We appreciate this time and your attention. We would ask that you take this back to the citizen and have more input, like the Diamante study that said because of the distance, we should have 2 stations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Wendell Newman, followed by Mr. Tom Daly.
Good morning, Commissioners and Chief, other members of the staff. I have presented to you this morning some questions for you to consider, and I'm not going to go through these, although I do think they do stand for my position on closure of the 2 existing fire stations at the present time. I am curious, too, in terms of how much information you have given to those of us who are going to be impacted by this proposed change. We found out, as my wife indicated a minute ago, about this just yesterday, and we would hope in the future that you would keep us better informed of what your plans are. I'm going to let those questions stand, but I will comment on a couple of things that I've heard since I've been here this morning. One is, it seems to me that as I viewed the map a little bit ago, I believe there are homes in Lakeview Estate area, right on the border of the Washoe County and Carson City areas. I believe there are some homes there that are actually in the Washoe County area, or in Washoe County. It seems to me that, and I've heard some comments earlier about this, the time it takes for the Carson City Fire Department to get a car, or I should say a fire station, a fire engine up to that area would be a lot longer than it would take for our Bowers Mansion area fire station to respond. So that's a concern that I have. And I'm not trying to belittle the Carson City Fire Station and their teams, but I don't think we can depend upon that in light of having the station there at Bowers area. The rodents, Chief, I don't want to make fun of you, but I don't think I'd bring that up in comparison with the care for people when it comes to rodents being a problem with the Bowers Station. The severity of the fires, I don't think there's any severity fire, or the severity of any of the fires, any greater than the one that was down there, Little Valley Fire. Tom Hall has spoken to you about that. And there's a number of people that haven't rebuilt and probably will never come back to that area. So that's a major consideration, I think, for that area. I'll let that stand, and I'm hopeful that in the future you will keep us better informed of what is going to be your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Next, Mr. Tom Daly, followed by Ms. Tammy Holt-Still.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and Commissioners. For the record, I'm Thomas Daly. The deployment plan presented for your consideration today will keep two primary fire stations serving Washoe Valley, being new TM 31 and Carson City Station 52 on College Parkway on enhanced automatic aid when dispatch improvements are fully implemented early next year. More importantly, response times approved by this board in 2012 for both suburban and rural parts of Washoe Valley will be maintained by this plan. That is no different than my neighborhood when we lost Station 38 and got Station 36. Slightly longer response times, but within the standard of cover. Two existing dilapidated TM stations are in need of about $5 million, and renovation and expansion costs to remain viable. For a 30 or 40-year-old station, hardly a wise investment. So the quantity of primary stations serving Washoe Valley under this plan would remain unchanged, only their locations would be different. That said, there are three significant improvements in the quality of service to Washoe Valley residents. First, the manpower will be 4, allowing for immediate 2-in, 2-out response to structure fires required by the OSHA rules. Existing stations 30 and 32 cannot do that. This is almost unique in the district. Only Station 40 Mogul has this capability. Your station doesn't, and my station doesn't. So Washoe Valley is getting a big improvement there. Second, when a paramedic is needed to go with REMSA, that unit is out of service. With the current situation, with 4-person manning, it is not. The time to go from Washoe Valley to the trauma centers in Reno and return that firefighter, paramedic, about an hour to 2 hours. Look at the data. With 4-person staffing, you don't have to do that. Again, that is a unique benefit to Washoe Valley residents that the rest of us don't have. Third, new TM 31 will be designated a must-cover station such that when they are engaged, another South Valley station will be dispatched to cover until their return to service. This deployment plan keeps the quantity of service unchanged, keeps response times within accepted and approved parameters, while improving the quality of service to Washoe Valley residents. This plan does so without raising taxes, the sort of outside-the-box thinking we are accustomed to from Chief Moore. I urge you to approve this plan.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Next, I have Ms. Tammy Holt. Finally, Ms. Tammy Holt still.
Tammy Holt Still, Lemon Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee for the record. I'm in the North Valleys. I represent quite a few people in the North Valleys. And listening to what I've listened to so far today, we in the North Valleys don't want the South Valleys to be in danger like we are now. It is time to look at your resources and be transparent. And if it takes doing something like killing rodents to take care of whatever the problem is, then it should be done. But what happened with that Little Valley fire was absolutely disgusting. And it was not right. That was obvious. You guys lost the lawsuit on it. So did the state. So there's issues that need to be addressed as a whole, and Washoe County needs to be transparent. Said that before, and you need to be responsive to your constituents, period, end of story. That hasn't happened. I know, for 2 years and 9 months, it hasn't happened. So if you're going to risk somebody else's life to have an excuse to do something in the North Valleys, you figure out another way to take care of the North Valleys, and you leave the South Valleys so they have protection. You don't rob Peter to pay Paul. You end up losing all the way around.
Thank you, Ms. Holtstone.
And Mr. Chairman, for the record, I also received correspondence from Stanley Bailey on this issue, which I will place on the record.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate that. Seeing no further public comment, I will bring it back to the board for discussion at this time. Now, commissioners, are there any comments? Commissioner Burke-Bigler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am a little disappointed that this did not go before the CAB chief, and I would hope that before you really expect the full board to approve this, that we take the opportunity to take this out into the community and let the community look at it also, because it is really a big plan and a big change. I think there's some value to the new station. I think there's some value to a four-man crew. I know there's some value to a four-man crew. I totally support that. And I've not had the opportunity to go through this entire thing. I will, but but I do think that there's a need to let the public have a better view of what we're proposing here and what we're looking at. As you know, I have indicated in the past to this board as well as to the chief that I think we need to do something about splitting stations in the north. And I'd like to know what the cost would be if we just decided to leave the south as is. What's the could you provide us with the overall cost of upgrading those two stations and also fixing the problem in the north? How many more personnel are we going to need? What's the cost associated with that? And you know, versus the cost associated with this particular plan that you have laid out before us, because I'd be curious about what those cost changes and those cost differences are. And if you could get this before the CAB, I would really appreciate it. Thank you, Chief.
All right. Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To go along with what Commissioner Burke-Bigler said, I think that before we move on with any direction about consolidation or stretching out resources, et cetera, that it needs to go to every CAB and how it will affect them and what the workaround would be. But I do have a question about looking towards the future as well. But first, go to the CABs just so you have your feedback and kind of you can see the gaps, if there are any, or some misperceptions about changing and redeploying limited use sources. And that is, can you bring us a report or just email us, whatever is easiest for you, really, what's quickest? How are we doing with our professionalization of our volunteer service members? And perhaps they could be fully upstaffed and working in that valley. I know that valley has a lot of retirees and, you know, people with some extra time on their hands, and that could be a force multiplier for their stations, particularly when it comes to medical calls. And then before we ever move forward on this, one day we might get the regional plan update that nobody worked on during the recession. So this should also guide us as to where is growth going, where do we anticipate. But I think one other area you might want to have the data analysis on is approved, not built, in terms of which way growth is going and growth that's already been approved. And then I've always thought that a good overlay for a fire service in which we put a paramedic on every single one of your crews, because we knew we only had 3 people and that you needed a paramedic. I need to know what the effort is for this area for REMSA, because I know Sun Valley, their effort, I mean, we do a lot of calls in Sun Valley, my district, for medical, and that's the way they access healthcare, right? Because of poverty and not being connected into any system. But I think we should also look at REMSA's standard of coverage and renegotiate that with this growth that's coming forward and what we expect them to, their response time. And then finally, I think it's important to note that those 2 buildings that would cost so much to rehab, to make light, I have to say this because I know you can't, to make light of where people live when they're responding to your emergency, I don't think is very nice. This is where our firefighters live for 4 days. And so bats and rodents are a real issue, and their comfort and care should be number one, not pretty facilities or more equipment, et cetera. We need more people at the bottom line, but they also have to have habitable living environments that don't, you know, make them have to confront hantavirus or, you know, I mean, I think sometimes we forget about, like, these are their homes. So I know that that's all over the place, but I think it's not yet ripe, but I think there's some workarounds that could give this aging population in this valley, and they in many ways have kind of created this situation for themselves because it's always been a no-growth area, and the regional plan went along with it. I disagree with that, by the way. But it's so that it's become so sparse out there that it doesn't meet our measures for as government, we're utilitarian. We have to do the largest best for the largest good, and that's the way it works. So another thing I was thinking that maybe we could partner with is the Cultivation, Production, and Dispensary Center right there, El Sol, that nobody wanted, to help put together a volunteer group to help update those stations or build a couple areas for people that they will be living in, to transition that to volunteer and professional mix. I'm sure there's a lot of creative ways, but you don't have an infinity for a budget, but maybe we should be looking at partners in these areas. And remember, we also denied the rock facility down there that would have given more density and response. So there is a back and forth with what you can expect and what you can't expect when you lower your density prematurely by artificial reasons, which is the population coming out and doing that. So I think those things are just what's ticking through my head. And if you want to talk further, let's talk about some other ways to do that. But going to the cabs is going to be your best and highest use of your time. I know it's a pain and it's a drag, but I think the cabs will give you a lot of good ideas because, and what I mean a pain and a drag, it's time consuming to go all these citizen advisory board meetings at night all over this valley. But I think you'll get some aha moments too for people and some other ideas. But I really do believe if it's possible, and I know this is a big if, managing volunteers is a full-time job that I would never want. It's very hard to manage volunteers. And if that's an impossibility, let's talk about that too. But I'm also looking at kind of the age of our firefighters. No offense, firefighters. I see a lot of much more wise people than me that are on our staff. So I'm sure they're getting ready to leave. And so we need to be, cultivating our home team and in our bullpen so that these volunteers can go up. And maybe if we make some sort of, hey, we're the hot shots for volunteers and there's a guaranteed job, X, Y, and Z, that might also be a way to alleviate some very real concerns that I understand from you in terms of response time when it comes to medical. And I think you're going to deal more of that in your aging population than the very big and dangerous fires that we have at the north that weren't started by another agency for controlled burn. And I know you're scared to death of fire, and I would be too down there. That was terrible. And we were really the luckiest county on the planet that nobody died during that fire at 3 a.m. and getting people out of there, mostly aged people. So I think I get where you're going with resource planning, and I know that you have to make the tough decisions. How do we deploy with the greatest good from this very limited resource? But I think if you went to the cabs, you'd hear some different help. And one thing that I do know about the Washoe Valley residents is they are problem solvers first and do a really good job at advocating for themselves, but also being really good at the give and take and the reality of the situation. So I think you can figure this out, and I'll help you and help this community too, any way I can, and advocate for my community as well. And then 4-person versus 3-person, I think we should have more talk about that. Because there's pros and cons on that one too, and staffing issues, and does that really fill the need considering we have a paramedic on every single engine that runs? And then, one more thing about the tankers. I didn't understand that, so if you could just, you don't have to clarify it today because we're late to our 10 o'clock, but if you could give us an email just like what is that argument with tankers and carrying water? And one final thing too, why isn't that state park providing firefighters? Why do they rely on the county, the 3rd visited state park, to do their water rescues? And I know I pay them. I'm a frequent flyer at that park. They get paid pretty well from us. And why aren't they being a force multiplier as well? They kind of owe us from some other stuff. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Jung. Commissioner Herman, do you have any comments? I have some comments. Being that this is my district and I do know these residents quite well, Mr. Hall, I visited your home directly right after the Little Valley fire, or what was left. should I say. This is frustrating to me that we're taking, obviously this is a discussion that we want to have and bring this information to light. However, I feel that our community outreach and our current community response has been lacking in this and needs to kind of go back and we need to really work this through because the public outreach is not even close to where I'd like it to be. Now the data is fantastic, and I've read through it, but basically, as most of you have heard, the clerk gave us a brand new packet this morning, and so I have been trying to read through it while I've been trying to conduct a meeting, which is very difficult. However, the issue that I see outside of the data is that the things that we don't talk about, specifically the challenges that I know from my residents in Washoe Valley, either on the East Lake side or whether in the Franktown side, is that address identification has been an issue. No matter whether we have CAD to CAD, whether we have a quality auto A, one of the issues that our firefighters have dealt with, new firefighters to the region, that for individuals, they are missing addresses because of the way some of those homes are geographically situated in that valley. And so it adds to run times no matter what. So no matter where you know an engine is coming from, especially if one engine company is deployed and we have automatic aid and we're bringing Carson into potentially from Airport Road, if they're in base, if they're not in base, they could be somewhere else because they only have the 3 stations in Carson City, they have to fulfill their needs in Carson City as well. Those firefighters are going to have a challenge finding certain locations. So I have challenges right there with those physical run times from the stations out of Carson City, the physical run times from 39, which brings firefighters who may not be familiar into the area. I have challenges with that no matter what. Then you look at the appendix back here that Deputy Chief brought to us. You're actually taking areas out of the SOC, or at least 70 calls based upon the 2017 numbers out of the SOC because we're going to consolidate the stations which are currently in the standards of care. So I think there's some issues there. And then we talk about the equipment at the proposed station. So you add four individuals to a brand new station. So you have 4 firefighters versus 3. But to Mr. Lowe's point, that's really a diminishing factor because it's right now currently 6. You can't run multiple tankers. You can't run. You can run an engine. But you can't staff a whole bunch of people in there and run a bunch of equipment out there with just 4 people. So you're really limited to what you can do from my understanding. And maybe we can identify that a little bit differently. And the other challenge I have with this is that there have been some very devastating fires in the north part of the district. There is no doubt to that. And I understand we need to look at better ways to better serve the northern part and the northern battalion and make sure that they have the resources because the data is there. 18 calls versus 6 on average per daily, or 6.9. It's dramatically different. But the issue is changing the station capacity really going to fix the issue in the north? Is that going to change? Because the way I look at it, we're going to change and consolidate the 2 stations in the south to provide at least the ability for a 2-person squad into Sun Valley. But we're really not having the discussion yet about adding the Station 44 and converting it into 2 stations. We haven't had that discussion yet, and so I think they need to go hand in hand to really see. And I think to Commissioner Jung's point, we need to take that back to both cabs simultaneously to identify some of those issues going forward. And I know we're on a limited budget. Increasingly, the City of Reno, and as they continue to annex our land, it makes it challenging for us to continue to fund services for our Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District through unincorporated citizens. That's a challenge. It's a constant challenge that we have to fight with. However, with the resources we have available, I think we need to be a little bit more cognizant about how we move forward in a manner. And so I would urge that staff go back and conduct some more public meetings, not just with the South Valley individuals and the individuals in Washoe Valley, but also the individuals in the North Valleys to find out what's the best case scenario for them as well. So those are my comments at this time. Thank you, Chief. So, Commissioner Herman, I do have you signed in now. Commissioner Herman.
Am I? Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Chief Moore for bringing all this information to us and alerting us to the problems that we have and for trying to find a way to get extra fire coverage in the North Valleys. I appreciate that very much. We have a challenge before us, and let's get busy working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Herman. All right. With that, at this time, I don't know if we can really, well, from my standpoint, obviously we'll open it up to any motion from any of the members of the board. It's my position that we just accept the report for the time being, and kind of, I think staff's got direction from us in regards to that. So I'll accept any motion at this time.
Accept the report as written.
I have a motion by Commissioner Jung, second by Commissioner Burke-Bigler. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Please vote on your screens. Please affirm your votes. Motion carries unanimously. All right, Chief. With that being said, should we postpone item 10?
Yes.
At this time, let's, and so that we can move along here. So we'll bring item 10 back at a later time once we've had a further discussion about the plan, the deployment plan. So we're going to take time, bench item 10 for this. We'll move on to item 11. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I just would comment, I appreciate you having that postponed because I'd really like to see the money connected to us. I love these studies, but if you look through this document, you see all kinds of facts and figures, and that's great, but there's no dollar signs attached to it, and I'd really like to see that. So I think that benefits us, and it benefits our constituents, because they can see really what it's going to cost to taxpayers if we go, which direction we go. So thank you very much for doing that.
All right. Chief, so we're on to item 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of time, I'll paraphrase the item. It's a recommendation to authorize payment of heart and lung to the city of Reno. If you'd like a presentation on this, don't believe our fiscal officer.
No, this is pretty standard. We're a standing item, so looking for a motion to accept. I have a motion from Commissioner Jung. Second.
We need a public comment if there is any.
There is no public comment, but thank you, Mr. DA, for pulling me over, but I do not see any public comment. Is there any other public comment on this item? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Commissioner Herman?
Oh.
Motion passes unanimously. Please affirm your votes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are on to our final item. This is item 12. Chief, any further comments that you'd like to make?
Not from me, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioners, are there any comments from you? Seeing none, I will take our final public, we'll move into our final public comment, item 13. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed in for public comment?
We do, Mr. Chairman. There's two people. First up is Mr. Bob Rusk, followed by Mr. Sam Dene.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Rusk.
Chairman, County Commissioners, 8 years in your seat. And in those days, in the 70s, they made these badges out of solid gold. So, you know, if any of you would like to have this, I'd give it to you, but you wouldn't. It's all yours, but you're going to have to leave my fire station right where it is. And you know, that station, Bowers, is near and dear to my heart. Because twice in the last 4 years, my heart has stopped. And the EMS guys came, and they started it back up again. Once, it took them 3 minutes to get there, but the other time I was at a dinner party off of Franktown up on the side of a hill. It took them about 10 minutes to get there. And by then, my heart had stopped altogether, according to the EMS guy. He says, I don't hear any heartbeat at all here, but they got me going again. Not everybody was thrilled about that, but my wife was. And that's what matters. What the heck? We've been together a long time. Now, if you just consider to keep that station in its place, when I first got involved out in Washoe Valley as a commissioner during the 70s, it was volunteer effort, and they did a great job. God bless them for that. And then we went to a full-time staff. Boy, it really got good then. And the community continued to build and build. And our net worth on that side, talking about the value of the individual homes, there's hundreds of them on the west side. They start at about $1 million. There's 2 homes there in excess of $10 million. Now, my point is simply this. We have a great tax base to justify the continuation of this fire station that has saved not only my life a couple of times, not that that means a damn thing, but a lot of other people. We are in an older population, and we would like to see that station stay in place. And I really appreciate the job you're doing. Better you than me. I will never do that job again, but I love what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, Mr. Sam Dene.
Sam Dene, the guard angel against media wacko freaks and other infestations of our community. I came down here actually for the regular meeting, but I got here as this meeting went over in time, and since I've waited this long, I do want to say a few things about our fire department. I want to give compliments and kudos to one of the nation's best fire departments, and I'm talking about the regular, the Reno, the volunteers, the men and the women. They do a phenomenal job, and the media does not give them the kudos that they deserve. Usually if the media is talking about them, they're finding something to complain about. If you look across the nation at fire departments, none is any better than our Reno Fire Department right here. And I'm Sam Dene. I've been watching these operations for many, many years, and they've had a few conflagrations between themselves, but they've always done a great job fighting the fires and making everything and making the citizens safe. Probably better, as good as anybody in the nation. And while I'm on in the mode of giving kudos, I want to give a kudo to myself, because nobody knows it, and the reason they don't know it is because the media wacko freaks are so scared of Sam and will not report the truth. But I am the person who single-handedly brought the C-130 cargo plane to Reno for the Air National Guard. They wanted fighter planes, and I said, only one. I said, let's get the cargo planes, and they got the C-130s. But along with those C-130s, I wanted them to get firefighting C-130s, but they didn't. They got regular old C-130 cargo planes. That was 10 years ago, 15 years ago now. So I continued on a new crusade of getting firefighting C-130. Then again, I was fighting the bureaucrats. They didn't want to get the firefighting version of the C-130. Finally, about 5 years ago, 3 years ago, they got the firefighting C-130, and nobody realized how important that is, as all we could say as a deterrent, is having pilots ready to go out and attack these fires at any given moment and put the fire out before they're out of control. Does anybody really understand what I just said? Those firefighting C-130s are critical to our firefighting force, and I thank myself as the person who single-handedly got not only the C-130 cargo planes, but the C-130 firefighting cargo planes. And now they are part of one of the best firefighting departments in the nation. Thank you, and thank you, and thank you for listening. And thank you for coming down and caring about our government enough. And I want to thank this young man over here for coming down here every week to protect Sam. And you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Dene. All right, seeing no further public comment, we'll bring it back to the board. We are going to adjourn the Fire Commission meeting. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do a quick changeover. We'll be back at 10:45, 10 minutes to start the Board of County Commissioners meeting.